In this video, we're going to learn about a role-playing game called Monsterhearts. I was able to run Monsterhearts for my Dungeons and Divas campaign group last fall and this spring, and so I'm going to talk about it. This video is actually going to be part of a 2-video series. In the first part, we're going to learn a little bit about how to play Monsterhearts, what the system is all about. And in the next video, which will be sometime in the future, we're going to learn a little bit about how I ran Monsterhearts, some of the things I learned as a game master running Monsterhearts, and in the game they call it the MC, and some of the things that I could have done better. I'm hoping that both these videos will help you decide if you want to run Monsterhearts in the future and how to run Monsterhearts better than I did in the future. So, if you don't know what Monsterhearts is a game that explores the messy lives of teenagers, but these teenagers also happen to be monsters. Now imagine, some of your favorite teenage fiction. It could be like a movie, a book series. I'm thinking Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And picture a quiet girl in the corner getting bullied by a jock. And it is not a fun scene to watch, but suddenly you're inside the girl's head and you realize that she's kind of huddled up, not because she's super sad about getting bullied, even though that's part of it. She's actually huddled up away from that jock because she can feel the hairs on the back of her neck rising and her anger building inside of her. And she's feeling the skin beginning to split at the back of her neck, which is about to reveal the werewolf, which she is. And she's trying really, really hard not to literally rip that jock apart. That's what I think about when I think about Monsterhearts. It's all of the teenage drama, teenage romance, everything that is involved in a teenage story, except that the main characters are monsters and they're just trying to fit in and figure out life. But it's all ramped up to 11 because when a vampire gets hungry, it's hard for them not to feed. So that's Monsterhearts. It ended up very, very good for us. There's a lot of different monster types you can play within Monsterhearts. In the main game, you can play a fairy, a ghost, a ghoul, a hollow, which is kind of like a zombie, but like more like Frankenstein, like it was created. You can play an infernal, which I believe is a demon type character. We didn't play with that. A mortal, which is just a human who hangs out with monsters. A queen, which has like a hive or people they can manipulate. A vampire, a werewolf, and a witch. So there's a lot of different types of monsters that you can play in Monsterhearts, but at its core, you're still a teenager trying just to get through the day when all these teenager things happen. You're also just a monster and you're trying to not let people know that you are a monster, and you're going to be put in really challenging situations that you're going to have to try and not just face the situation, but face the monstrous nature inside of you and figure out how to get through that situation without revealing yourself or doing something very, very horrible. All right, now Monsterhearts is also a play by the apocalypse game. If you've never played a game like that, essentially, as far as I know, all of the play by the apocalypse games run on the same conflict resolution mechanic, where when your character tries to do something, you're going to roll 2 6-sided dice, 2d6. And the result is going to determine how successful you are in the thing that you were trying to do. If the result is a 10 or more, it's a complete success or a very good success where you do the thing you wanted to and something good might happen. If it's a 7 to 9, it's a mixed success, which means you do the thing that you wanted to, except that there is some sort of drawback to that. And then a 6 or lower means you fail at what you do, but your character does gain experience. I think most or all Powered by the Apocalypse games use that core mechanic, and this is the same as those. Now, the last thing I want to make sure everyone is aware of if you're approaching or thinking of playing Monsterhearts is that I would consider this a mature game. All right, first of all, Monsterhearts describes itself as queer. It pushes back on the heterosexual framework in society, and our group found that really interesting to role play within. But it also includes a lot of adult themes. It includes feral violence, sex, and sexuality. There are actual sex moves that are included for each character, and sex is built in both thematically and mechanically as part of the game. And the monsters that the characters are, each of them explore a topic that should be approached in a mature way, in my opinion, like substance abuse. The ghoul character, for example, is always chasing that next high. It doesn't necessarily have to be substance abuse, like in our game it was cliff jumping, but the ghoul is really set up to explore the reality, which is often gritty and dark, of substance abuse. Some of these other types of characters explore some of the other maybe darker traits of human nature, like the vampire with consent issues, and let's see if I can find another good one. Really the ghost with privacy. And so each of these monsters that the PCs can become are going to explore something that's dark about human nature. You can get away with running a game and not really touching on some of those darker issues, but they're there thematically and they're mechanically, and it's just so important to know that you're going to be running a game with these mature themes if you're playing Monsterhearts. So if you don't want to do that, I wouldn't suggest Monsterhearts for you, but it is a rich game, and I think it's it sets up some incredible role play moments, but you have to know going in that it's going to be a mature game for mature gamers, at least in my opinion. And so I would make sure you pick your group carefully. Now, what did my group do? My group, we ran 2 seasons of this game. We kind of thought of it almost like a TV show. 9 sessions in total. Season 1 happened last fall. That's the fall of 2022. And Season 2 happened in the spring of 2023. Like I said, this video here is going to talk a little bit about how the rules of Monsterhearts work, and I'm going to share that through the lens of our campaign. Most of this video is going to be what I did during session 0 to teach this system to my group. Then the next video, which will come out sometime in the future, is going to talk about what I learned, what went well, what didn't go well, and the mistakes that I made, in hopes that if you are going to be a game master or an MC for Monsterhearts, that you'll get some experience just from what I was able to learn. Now, before we move on, I do want to mention that one of my game resources, Distress Calls for Space RPGs, is on sale right now for the next 10 days. So if you're watching this within the first week that this is released, you can get 30% off on that resource. It's basically a resource that allows you, I've built out hand-designed, handcrafted distress calls. These are not procedurally generated tables. These are skill-based distress calls with character details, resolution details, skill ideas, mechanics, things like that, where you can easily plug and play it into any of your sci-fi RPG games. So check it out if you're interested. I'll stop talking about that, and I'm going to go back into Monsterhearts. So when I approached Monsterhearts with my group, we talked about what type of game we wanted, and this system fit the type of game that we wanted to play. We wanted to play a game that took place in present day. We wanted to play a game that was that has that setting where on the surface it's life as we know it, life is normal, but underneath there's magic and there's monsters and there's danger lurking in the dark. And this system fit that bill really, really well. And so that's what we wanted to do. Now, we decided all of that before session 0, but when it was time to sit down and play, the very first thing I did during session 0 was I talked about safety. Because, as I said before, Monsterhearts is, in my opinion, a mature game and should be handled and played with mature gamers. So I wanted to make sure before we even started playing that everybody was on the same page as to what type of game this was going to be, and that everybody was comfortable. And the first tool I used to do this is something called the no-go list. Essentially, it's a list of topics that somebody doesn't want to play or approach within the game. So for example, this is the one I always add to the list, or one of them. I have children at home. I have 2 kids of my own. And when I play role-playing games, I do not want to encounter a situation where there is child danger or child death or a child getting hurt or anything like that on the screen. I prefer if those things happen off screen, so me as a person, I don't have to think about it, and I definitely don't want to approach a situation in the game where that is occurring on screen and my character has to interact with it, or somebody else's character who I'm paying attention to has to interact with it. So that is one that I always add to the no-go list because it's just not something I'm interested in role-playing. It hits too closely to some of my own fears for my own family, and so that goes on the list. So everybody knows as we're playing that, hey, we're just not going to put children in danger on screen when we're playing this game. everyone had something to say about the no-go list, and that was the very first thing we started with. We had a list of 5 or 6 items, and then what I did is I printed that off and I put it up on the wall as a reminder to everybody that these topics will not be approached. Now, it was then my job when we were playing to make sure that if one of these topics was approached, that I would stop the game, remind everybody about the no-go list, and then rewind the action until we got before that scene, and then start the game again in a different direction. And so this worked really, really well for us. I did make one mistake with the no-go list. I'm going to cover that in the next video and how you can avoid it, but it worked very, very well for us. The next tool that I would suggest running, and what we did in our game, is a tool called the X card. This is a tool actually covered in the book, the Monsterhearts rules. The X card is essentially a note card with an X on it. And the purpose of this is that if the story that everybody is building at any point comes to a place that somebody feels uncomfortable, and even if it's not a topic on the X list, they can tap the X card or hold it up in the air, and they can let me know that, hey, I feel uncomfortable. I think this is a good tool because it's hard sometimes to speak up in a moment where you feel uncomfortable, especially if every single person around the game or around the table seems to be engaged in having fun, but all of a sudden you're not because of something that's happening. This is a more accessible way for you to let the game master know, or one of your characters to let you know, that, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Can we pause, maybe regroup and back up to a place where I feel more comfortable? We instituted this in our game, and I learned a few things about this, which again I'll cover in the next video, but it was a good tool for us. It kind of helped us remind us all. It was a physical reminder right in front of us what was on the no-go list, and that, hey, there's 5 other people here in this game that are trying to have fun. So we do need to think about the types of story we're trying to tell and make sure that we're aware of everybody's comfort level. Now, the final thing we talked about in this session 0 around group safety and comfort levels for playing this game is the fade to black tool. And this is also covered in the Monsterheart rules. And I think this tool is spectacular. I've never actually heard of this before or used it, at least consciously, and maybe it may have came up in role-playing sessions at some point. Essentially, what this tool says is if you approach a story situation that everybody is comfortable for it to be included in the story, but you don't want to actually role-play this scene, you just say, okay, fade to black. And we used this all the time when we were running our campaign. Most often we used it when any of the sex scenes came up in the story, because it was kind of fun for the group to like role play, romance and this and that and flirting. And then when things got steamy, nobody was really interested in role playing those details. So someone would just kind of, as the scene was going on, someone would say, okay, fade to black, and we would all kind of know how that scene ended. But we didn't have to sit there, shine a spotlight on that scene, and really role play everything out with it. And that worked really, really well. So those were the 3 tools that I covered in session 0 at the very start of our session 0. Was the no-go list, made sure everyone's on the same page there. We covered the X card and how to use it, and the fade to black tool and how to use that within our game. Once everybody was all set with understanding our comfort levels about certain topics, we began to move to how the game works. I always try and give a brief overview of how the game works before character creation, so that my players can really understand like what they're doing in character creation, because there are decisions they have to make, and if they don't understand the context with how those decisions will impact gameplay, it's hard for them to make those decisions. So I talked about the main mechanic of the dice rolls. I've kind of already covered. I talked about how any decision that your character is going to make with conflict, anything that they're going to try and do, they are going to roll 2 6-sided dice. So I'll give you an example here. Let's pretend it's homeroom. And by the way, this is an example I actually used when we started role-playing during session 0. But you're in homeroom, and the local jock comes up. His name is Chad Newhouse, and he starts to bully you. He sees you as like the new person in town, and he just wants to let you know that he's top dog here in this small town on the west coast of Washington. And what you might want to do is kind of put him in his place, like stand up to him and say, you know what, I'm not going to take this from the local bully, from the local football star. I'm going to let him know and everybody else that I am not to be messed with. So what you do is you roll your 2 dice, add whatever modifiers that your character happen to has. If it's 10 or higher, it's a complete success. That means you're able to tell this Chad Newhouse character, hey, get away from me. I don't take that. And Chad Newhouse is embarrassed because he was unable to bully this new person. And Chad Newhouse goes and sits down at his desk. Now let's say the dice were rolled and a 7 to 9 was rolled instead. Well, in this case, you're successful. Chad Newhouse is still embarrassed. You've told him to go sit down. You don't take this from anybody, except the teacher came in because you used some foul language when you were telling Chad to go sit down, and the teacher saw that. So now you have detention at the end of school. And so, yeah, you were successful, but there was some sort of drawback that happened in this situation. And so now you got that detention on the very first day of school. And if you roll a 6 or lower, things just don't go well. Maybe you try and scramble out of your desk to stand up in Chad Newhouse's face and talk right back to him. But in doing so, you slip and trip and fall on the ground. And maybe you had, I don't know, a water bottle and that spills on top of you and your papers are all over the place. And now all of a sudden, all of homeroom is laughing at you. You've been bullied by Chad Newhouse, this character who is kind of mean. And you kind of made a fool of yourself in front of the entire class. So you've been bullied, you made a fool of yourself, and now you're the one who's embarrassed on the very first day of school in a new school system. And so that's basically how the dice results work. It's always going to be 10 plus, 7 to 9, 6 below. And I should add, if you do roll a 6 or lower, you do gain experience. And that's one of my favorite things about these systems, because even if you fail, something good results from it. I will say another great thing about these dice result systems is it's really easy to move the story forward because there's a lot of different complications that can be added even if there's a roll that's successful, and it can keep the game moving. For example, if you get detention after school, even though you've been able to successfully tell Chad Newhouse to go sit down, you get detention. Well, now you're going to be meeting someone new in detention. Or maybe you don't want to go to detention. Maybe something happens after school that you need to get to and you skip their first detention on the first day of school. Is it going to be worth it? I don't know. We'll find out. Now, when you roll these dice, you're not just in Monsterhearts, you're not just making up whatever it is that you want to do. There are different moves that you're going to be doing in Monsterhearts. And there's 6 main moves that every single character has, as well as a big list of character and monster specific moves. So here are the moves that you can make in Monsterhearts. The first one is turn someone on. This move is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically seducing or flirting or smiling at somebody who you're talking to or you're near. It's also the only move that I, as a MC or game master, can make somebody roll because they might not be trying to do it, but if this situation or story calls for a possible romantic or flirty moment, maybe that is going to be something that I make a character roll. So turning somebody on is one of the moves. Shutting somebody down is another move. That would be the move that I just used in the example with Chad Newhouse, is trying to get them on the back foot and basically tell them like, hey, whatever you're doing, it's gonna stop. The third move that you can make is keep your cool. This is mostly used when danger is on the line. So it could be, for example, trying to sneak out of your room at night, maybe going onto the roof and sneaking out and trying to get away without your parents seeing. It could be, maybe there's a gang of werewolves nearby and you're just trying to sneak through the forest without them knowing that you're there. Or it could just be, actually keeping your cool, like keeping a calm, level head and not becoming the monster inside of you as something bad is happening around you. The next one is lash out physically. This is the fourth move you can use. It's exactly as it sounds. It is trying to hurt somebody. The big difference here is that lash out physically, the goal of this move is to actually hurt somebody, whereas if you want to like slap somebody or push somebody without the intention of hurting them, but rather of making them embarrassed or trying to shut someone down, it would be the shut someone down move. So we did have some discussions with my group about like, they'd say like, hey, I want to slap them. And so the question after that is, okay, is your intention for it to hurt? Or is your intention to, do something else, to make them embarrassed, to shut them up, to, something like that. And so it is important to ask the intention behind some of these moves to understand where it fits. The fifth move is run away. This was used fairly often with my group, just running away from a situation. And then the sixth one is gaze into the abyss. Gaze into the abyss is a move that Basically involves almost anything that has to do with the dark magic and monstrous nature of the setting that you're in. So it could be like researching some sort of fantasy or magical creature on the internet, or going to a library and trying to find this old book in the forbidden section, or trying to meditate, or find answers about all the strange things happening. It's a very broad category as far as a move goes, but it can fit anything that has to do with the monsters around you, or the magic, or things like that. So those are the main moves that are used during gameplay. And you can see how those moves tell you what type of game it is that you're playing. Each character or monster type, they're called skins in this game, also has different skin moves. So for example, the witch has spells they can cast. The ghost can potentially like float through walls and things like that. So there's character specific skin moves that you can use. There's also sex moves. If your character has sex, there's going to be different role playing prompts that happen afterwards, or a few other mechanical changes that could happen within the game. So I described that, took like 5 or 10 minutes. We talked about how the game works with my group. And then we got, and then I should say there's one more thing that's really, really important actually, and it's called strings. In Monsterhearts, there is like an in-game currency called strings. And what this basically does is it means that your character has formed a connection with another character, but that connection, that string, is actually the power dynamic in the relationship. So if you hold a string on somebody else, that means you have the upper hand in this relationship as far as the power dynamic goes, and you can do things to that character or to that NPC. And so strings are, like I said, they're in-game currency, and they can essentially be cashed in to do one of 4 things. You can do it to tempt somebody. So you can basically give another character or an NPC like a deal and say, hey, here's what I'll do. If you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And it's a mechanical way to make that happen. You can give them a condition. So you can use the string to make somebody embarrassed, or make somebody, I don't know, lonely, or something like that. And then that character or NPC needs to do something specific to get over that condition. And again, it's another way to have some really cool role-playing moments, but have it impact the game mechanically. And then finally, your string can be used to add 1 to a roll against that person, or add 1 harm if you're dealing harm to that person. And I think this is a really, really cool idea as far as, again, it's an in-game currency, because it's so nice to role play with something that has a mechanical attachment to it, because it kind of forces the characters to think about, okay, I have a string on this one NPC or on this other character. How can I use that to my advantage? And that fits so well with this theme where, in teenage drama and teenage fiction, there's a lot of manipulation that goes on between characters, and this represents a lot of that manipulation and the power dynamic between characters and relationships between characters. So I discussed all of that with my players. We discussed the moves, strings, how dice results work, and then just briefly about how health works. Basically in this game, if you don't want to die, you won't die, but you will become your darkest self, which is like the full version of the monster that's inside you, and that's usually not a good thing. So we just briefly mentioned that so that they knew, if their character was close to dying, what the danger would actually be. And then we went into setting creation. Setting creation is like the favorite thing about my players in this group. They absolutely love setting creation. So I kind of started with a blank slate. I just said, what type of game do we want to play? We know it's going to be present day. We know it's going to be teenagers on the older side of high school, 17, 18, 19, just trying to finish out high school and graduate. But I said, where are we? Are we in the United States? Are we somewhere else? And they came up with some really, really cool ideas. They decided that we were going to be at a high school called Hatopic High. And that was going to be in the Northwest, so on the west coast of Washington somewhere. And really the goal was to just have a small town that everybody could buy into. After we had the location and kind of the broad strokes of the setting figured out, I went through and I had every single player come up with an important location in that town that would be a part of that story, just so we would have places to go and things to do within the story. And so they came up with things like a cliff diving spot, somewhere where the locals would jump off the cliff 30, 40 feet down into the ocean. There was Snack Time, which was a small food hut in town that employed a lot of the local high schoolers. There was an abandoned building and parking lot near the edge of town that was kind of the local party place. People would go there and party. There'd just be like pop-up parties on the weekends. There was a mechanic shop, and this is the other big place where some of the students from the school worked. There was a book which became Curious Curiosities, as far as the name goes, and it sold like rare books, like crystal astrology stuff, but it also had real magic in there, and that location ended up becoming one of the characters' grandmother's stores where some of the characters ended up working. And then the docks. The docks were also kind of a key feature of this town. There was a few sailboats for a few wealthy people who vacationed in town, but most of the rest were local fishing boats. And so after setting creation, we created our main city. We created our locations. We were onto character creation. When you create a character in this game in Monsterhearts, it's actually pretty fast. The characters are pre-made basically, as far as you're not rolling up skills or attributes. You're essentially selecting, and it's really cool how it's done. There's like little bubbles you can fill in based on what type of character you want to make, and it's very fast to do. But there are a lot of role-playing opportunities. So once we had our setting created, the players each sat down, created their characters. They selected their skin, their stats, their moves for that, and then their backstory. Now, the backstory is super fun because you essentially figure out how your characters are connected in one way or another, and you can begin building the relationship that your characters have had in this school over time. So for a few examples, our witch character was trying to collect things from people because she needed things to cast her spells. So she had a flower of one of the characters, and they had a needle of one of the other characters, which was important to both of those characters. One of the characters had seen the death of another character, but doesn't remember it. And so we had this weird dynamic where one of the characters had witnessed the death but didn't remember. The character who died remembers coming back to life, knows that this character had seen her death, but there's never been any discussion about it. And so that was a recurring theme throughout this. One of the characters didn't know how to act socially because they didn't really have a past. And so they were obsessed with another character, mostly because they were trying to learn how to act in these situations. And so the backstory connections you can make in this game are very, very cool. Each skin kind of has a prompt, and it works really, really well, especially if your group loves building those relationships and role-playing together. So our group had done setting creation and character creation. At this point, what I did is I say, oh, okay, we're gonna start playing. It is homeroom. On the very first day of school, first period, your character is going to walk in the room. We talked about who might get there early, who might get there late. But then what we did is we also kind of went around the circle and had everybody add one or two NPCs to this homeroom seating chart. And the game in the rules suggests using a seating chart, and that is what we did. We used a seating chart, and I'm trying to find mine here. Here we go. But it was cool because each of our players could then add somebody to the homeroom seating chart that kind of, added to this interesting teenage drama setting. So a few people that were added by my players included, let's see here, Travers. Travers was kind of one of those kids who wants to be a rap star, so we'd always be ready and quick with a rhyme, which was super fun for me to try and DM on the fly. Bill Lewis, who was a civics nerd, huge into student politics, huge into national politics, always wanted to talk about what was going on. There was Tim. Tim was just the worst. He was kind of mean, but he just kind of followed the jock Chad Newhouse around and tried to get Chad to like him by picking on other people. One of the characters ended up becoming, or was friends with Tim, and never really knew why, but they just kind of hung out, and it was kind of funny in those scenes. Let's see, who else? And Summer. So Summer was ended up becoming one of the key people in the very first season because of what happened to her. But she was just nice. She would be described as nice, as pretty, and as somebody who everybody could get along with. So After the homeroom seating chart was done, I went through like a basic role-playing practice where I had Chad Newhouse go and try and pick on one of the players or their characters. We figured out how the mechanics worked through that. And then I kind of finished up by running through the main storyline that was going to end, or I guess going to run through the whole first season of our game. I basically gave everybody a Snapchat.
Hey fam, it's your girl Keely Masters here. First party of the year, my house, homework burning party. See you there.
Which it was from one of the popular girls whose name was Keely Masters, and she was invited everybody to a party at her place that night. That would be setting the stage for our second session, but the interesting thing was not everybody received the Snapchat. And so some of the characters who wanted to go had to try and find somebody who got the Snapchat and try and get an invite from one of them. So that led to some really cool role-playing moments. As soon as that kind of scene was over, the fire alarm was pulled and the characters had to figure out what they do. It was the first day of school. Were they going to leave and shuffle out of the building like they were supposed to? Or were they going to get up to mischief? As they started to get up to mischief, they realized that Rebecca, the kind of the nerdy book person in the class, and Summer were going off somewhere else in the school, which was very out of character for them. And just as our characters decided to follow them and they rounded the corner, they saw Summer getting into a locker and Rebecca closing the locker, and then the lights went out at school, and that's where we ended the first session. And this went really, really well for us. The book suggests a few different ways to run a campaign and kind of storylines to start. And one of them is a missing person. So I chose that one, and I decided that, hey, Summer, the person that everybody likes, the nice person, she's going to go missing. And we're going to start this session off with the mystery. And so we ended in that moment when our characters saw Summer getting closed in a locker with Rebecca, and then the lights in school go out. And that really set the stage and amped everybody up for our next session the following week. I'm not going to talk about that here, though. This video has gone on long enough, and hopefully it has given all of you a little bit more knowledge and understanding of what type of game Monsterhearts is and how to run it. I'll put a link below to Monsterhearts if you're interested in checking it out. I highly recommend the system. I thought it was very, very fun. Please tune in for the next video because I'll be talking a little bit more about how I, like some of the advice I have and how I ran Monsterhearts, as well as some of the problems I had, how I overcame them, and just some mistakes I made along the way. And I got other links down below as well for the games I'm selling. Again, one of them is on sale for the next few days, so check that out. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.